You're listening to Thunder Quack Podcast Network.
Hello and welcome back to the Thunder Quack Podcast, the official podcast of thunderquack.com. I'm going to spare you guys the rigmarole this week because obviously we are in a strange time in the history that we're living through at the moment, and with the pandemic and with everything else that's going on that we're going to talk about a lot on this episode. So the only thing that I got to do up front here is just mention our Patreon producers, JJ Samuel and Brian Murawski. Thank you guys for supporting us over on patreon.com/thunderquack. But like I said, no rigmarole. We're gonna forego that. We're gonna get right into it. So first and foremost, I want to start this episode by just stating unequivocally that Thunderquack, all of our podcasts, everybody on the team stands with Black Lives Matter and the protesters that have all been out there for the last, at this point, week and a little bit, protesting police brutality. And it's been a really, really enlightening and I don't know, man. I'm a little bit at a loss for words right now, which is not normal for me, right? But it's been a very interesting week and a half as everything has kind of unfolded following the murder of George Floyd in Minneapolis, and just today, as we're recording this on Sunday night, June the 7th, Minneapolis City Council has said that they're going to be taking steps to basically shut down their police and figuring out a different plan for community safety. So we're maybe a little bit late in joining the conversation, but one of the reasons for that is that I wanted to make sure that Amanda and I weren't piping in with our two white voices to add noise and take away from the important aspects of the conversation. But as things are starting to, I don't want to say settle down, because I don't want to give the impression that this movement needs to slow in any way. I think if anything, right now is actually when we crank the accelerator and move forward even faster with the incredible power of everything that's happened in the last week and a half. But as I think as the doors actually start to open and the conversation starts to shift away from protests and riots and looting and all of that stuff and into lasting change, that we wanted to jump back in here and have a conversation about this. Now, before I introduce my co-host for this evening, in fact, the host for this episode, and I'll be taking the backseat and co-hosting. Before I do that, I just want to say that us stating our support of Black Lives Matter and everything that's happening right now is all well and good, and I like to see that a lot of people are out there and they are standing up and using their platforms, using their voice. Obviously, we know that action is a lot more important than just chiming in and saying that we support it. So with that in mind, Thunderquack is going to be putting a $100 donation towards the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. So I'll be doing that tonight after we record. And that with the goal of us trying to help contribute to obviously the progressive change that needs to happen for tragedies like this to stop. which I think is really the goal, and obviously defunding police and reforming either or, honestly, in my opinion, are going to be good steps towards that. So without further ado, let me introduce my host for this evening. You guys know Kyle Avery from Star Wars: The Saga Continues, but of course I know Kyle as one of the commenters, one of the contributors on the Frontlines, the Clone Wars podcast message boards from way back in the day. And Kyle I actually was one of the first people to reach out and support me on that podcast by doing recaps, by writing recaps for me. So you can say that Kyle is the second member of the Thunderquack Podcast Network, because he was really the first one to join in and help me out. So it's cool to have you on the Thunderquack Podcast, and I'm gonna kind of step back a little bit, and I'm gonna kind of give the floor to you to direct this conversation, and I'll just kind of jump in when when there's an appropriate time for me to talk. But I give the floor to you, sir.
Okay, well, yeah, thanks for having me, Mike. Yeah, like you said, we go way back. I think not only did I write recaps for Frontlines, the Clone Wars podcast, I don't know if you remember this, I wrote you your first piece of hate mail, only because you kept asking for it, like your first few episodes. I obviously didn't hate the show because here I am now, but
yeah, I do remember that. I do.
Yeah, you're like, I'm not a legitimate podcast till somebody sends me hate mail, and so I like nitpicked something I didn't agree with and was like, sure, I'll play it up and write you some hate mail if you want it. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, obviously it's crazy times going on, like you mentioned. And I don't know. I mean, I'm happy to kind of take the lead on the discussion. But if you have like questions or certain discussion points that you want me to talk about, go for it. Because I mean, I don't even know where to start. But yeah, I mean, I want to sort of preface with this because I mean, I know like you wanted to have me on here because I'm like the only Black person among our group of Thunderquack hosts. But my experience is not, I'm not here to speak for all Black people. If there's a sort of a typical, I mean, like everybody's experience is different, but if there's like a typical or average Black life in America, mine certainly has not been it. And I've admittedly, like I've had a very privileged upbringing in life that I'm very grateful for and haven't had a lot of like the struggles and oppression and stuff that a lot of other Black people face. And I'm even trying to sort of be open and like learn like from other people's experiences right now. But at the same time, I'm aware of it enough that like, even though, for example, like I've only ever had like respectful, peaceful interactions with police officers, whether it was me being like pulled over for a speeding ticket or being involved in an accident or whatever. I've always been professional with them. They've been respectful and professional to me. And I've never felt racially profiled or anything like that. But at the same time, it is a thing where like I still always kind of have to look over my shoulder and like be on alert and probably, just be more aware of certain things in that situation than maybe somebody else would have to, just knowing the possibility and the track record and the history. And my parents certainly raised me with that. My mom especially, always telling me like as a young Black man, these are the things you got to watch out for, and these are the way that people are going to perceive you and stuff like that. So yeah, so definitely, I feel like I share that struggle and that experience to an extent. But I will also say, with everything that's going on right now, I mean, the frustrating thing is that this keeps happening, right? It seems like every year or every couple of years for the past 10 years, I mean, it seems like it's been kind of a trend that's been getting a lot of media attention, but this really goes back to like the 50s and 60s. And heck, before that, there was slavery and Jim Crow laws and all that kind of stuff. So obviously this is not a recent occurrence, but just with this string of, it seems like you can kind of just trace this almost recent wave of incidents, if you will, back to like Trayvon Martin in like 2012, and then Michael Brown and Philando Castile and all the other ones that have happened since then. Like it keeps happening, and people get outraged and people protest, and then it's hot news for a week, and then it kind of dies down and goes away. And obviously, like, as the Black community, we don't forget about that, and we remember that this is still stuff that could happen to anybody at any time. But as far as it just being national news or international news in this case, as you see protests now happening all over the world, like, this time kind of feels different. Like, it doesn't, I mean, like you mentioned, that it's been going on for just about 2 weeks at this point. And so it's not like there's a couple of days of protesting and it's dying down or going away. Like, and I hope that this is not a conversation that anybody stops having anytime soon. There have also been some heartening changes that I've already seen kind of going on right now. For example, like the 4 officers that were involved in George Floyd's murder were all immediately terminated, and the one guy was charged with murder, and then his murder charge was upgraded, and the other 3 officers were charged. And even the fact that that has happened as quickly as it has is huge progress compared to other things. I mean, in the past, some of the other incidents, like the rioting and looting, didn't even start right away. It started when they announced that the officers weren't going to be charged or that they were found innocent, and then people got really upset about it. And so the fact that now, you have this whole, kind of this big outrage just over the fact that this happened again, but there's immediate action being taken against the people responsible. And just, again, seeing the outpouring of support from all over the world. I mean, I know just speaking about it or posting on social media or even like marching in demonstrations is not necessarily, going to affect immediate change. And there are still more steps that need to be taken. But, seeing... just as a Black man in America, knowing that, this is a issue that's, I mean, it's worldwide. Like, police brutality and racism is a worldwide issue. But, these specific killings and these, like I said, kind of this chain of incidents that feels like it keeps happening is kind of like a Black America issue. And to see people marching, protesting it in New Zealand and Germany and, every corner of the globe, like, it's really cool to see. I mean, it's sad at the same time to know that this has been going on for so long, and it's enough of an atrocity that, like, the whole world is telling you to stop. We shouldn't have even gotten to this point, but at the same time, seeing so many people rise up and just seeing that support from all over the place is encouraging. And like I said, it feels like it's different this time, and I really hope that this is the point where some lasting change gets made, because you don't want to say, oh, George Floyd was a really big one, and then that died down, and then next year somebody else happens and it gets even bigger again. You don't want this to keep being a wave that just gets bigger and bigger every time until it finally eventually change happens and it stops happening. It's like, let's just get to that point now where we're changing the system and making sure that we don't have to keep dealing with this.
Yeah, I think the key aspect of it that you touched on there was the accountability part of it, right? It's people don't necessarily get the outrage doesn't reach a fever pitch when people find out what happened. In fact, I would say the cynical perspective on it is that we're probably a little bit desensitized to it at this point. It's been, for the last, I would say, 5 years, an onslaught of every couple months. There's another one of these dash cams or cell phone videos or something about a police interaction that turns into an unarmed Black person dead, right? And I think in all of the instances where it's been a flashpoint and where it's had the opportunity for cultural change, it has been the outrage at the lack of justice after the fact, right?
Yeah.
And it's the fact that not that it happens, because like I'm gonna be really blunt here and say I don't think that it stops happening, right? I don't think that abolishing the police or reforming the police is going to end racism, right? I think that that's a problem that that will persist forever. As long as there's one group of people, there will be an other, right?
Yeah.
Obviously, the specifics of racism against Black people in America is its own case, but I'm just saying it's the lack of justice, I think, that is most upsetting for people, and that they want to see change first and foremost, because I think that with that you'll see a lot less of this. The lack of accountability on the part of the police, and oversight, and just sort of their ability to act without any worry of repercussion, whether it's through qualified immunity or it's just a result of the insular protective nature of police unions, and sort of that brotherhood of law enforcement. Like those are the aspects that need to be dismantled, because if they are, if those elements aren't in play, then police officers will be more careful, right? They'll have to be, because right now, if they do something, the likelihood of them just getting away with it and not seeing any punitive action, even suspension or anything like that, like it's staggering how often, like, if you look at the statistics of this, how often these incidents just don't become anything. The other part of it is how often, if another police officer intervenes or reports it or speaks out against it, how often they're fired for that action.
Yeah, and that obviously needs to stop too. Like,
so, like, it's the phrase. Some people will say all cops are bad. The phrase is actually all cops are bastards, and I think that one of the things that I heard recently listening to people talk about this, is that the reason why it's all cops are bastards is because the system is a bastardization, right? It's to serve and protect, and yet that serve and protect seems to only apply to white people, right? And that like the very nature of that, it's the idea of when white people call the cops because they need somebody to come help, right? But what does a Black or a Hispanic or Latino person do if they need to call the cops, if they need the police to come, when it is entirely likely that they don't feel safe, right? Like these are kind of the core issues here, that are involved in this, that people are talking about, and George Floyd's murder, and I think that the way that we talk about that, even the way the language that we use, we don't say his death, right? We don't say the incident or situation, right? His murder, it's just a flashpoint for the issue of police brutality and the very clearly unbalanced system that lifts one side up and oppresses the other. And yeah, it's I don't know. Obviously, being in Canada, I have different experiences with the police, but what I've seen over the past few years, as a result of social media, is it just, every time another video gets posted online, it's just the question just reverberates in my head of, like, when is this going to change? But like, how, like, what is any one person supposed to do? I don't think that you or I have answers for that. So it's more of a rhetorical question for everybody to kind of think about at home. But
Yeah. But that is a good question though, because, and that's something that I've thought about, because we have to kind of ask ourselves that question of like, okay, well, we want lasting change, but what does that change look like?
yeah,
And it's not something that any one of us can affect. But, like you said, I mean, you can sit at home tweeting Black Lives Matter all day, and then you realize like, okay, well, it's great that I said that or that I feel that way, but like I want to do something more to actually support the cause or to help affect change. Or even like you go march and protest, and it's like, well, what are we protesting for specifically?
mm-hmm.
And so, and again, like we want change, we want the system change, we want this to stop happening, but what specifically does that look like? And for me, like I said, one just big step towards all that was, like you said, the accountability of it. The fact that this cell phone video, captured this guy kneeling on George Floyd's neck, went viral. Everybody saw it. He got fired. He got charged. The other officers involved were also charged, which, by the way, I'm sure a lot of people probably have seen this, but for anybody who hasn't seen like the additional coverage of that video,
Mm-hmm.
because it's the main video that went viral. You see the one officer that's kneeling on his neck, and there's another one just kind of standing by, like holding the crowd back, and obviously not doing anything to stop him. But there were 4 officers that got fired, so it's like, okay, well, where were the other 2? They're also kneeling on George Floyd. Like there are pictures and other video from like the other side of the street, where you can see he's like behind the police vehicle. So in that first video, you could only see George Floyd's head kind of like sticking out from behind the car. But the other 2 officers were also like kneeling on his back. So like, yeah, the one guy, you can't argue like, oh, I had to keep him restrained. The guy that was kneeling on his neck could have gotten off of him, and there's still 2 fully grown adults kneeling on his back. But, I mean, nobody's arguing that was like okay or anything, so we don't need to go into that. But like, again, so the fact that all of them were immediately terminated, that they're being charged, like that I think is step one, because we have to have accountability for this kind of stuff. And I think we are seeing, at least with a few recent cases, seeing that sort of trending in the right direction. Like there was also the case, I think last year or the year before, with, gosh, I'm blanking on the guy's name. Botham Jean, who's the black guy that was just sitting in his apartment, and a female police officer walked in on him, supposedly thinking it was her apartment. And so she claims, she thought she walked into her apartment and walked into the wrong one, and saw a black guy just chilling there in her living room and shot him.
Yeah.
And she's in jail now. So, seeing officers start to be held accountable for this kind of stuff is progress. At the same time, you have like Breonna Taylor, who was just killed, I think, back in March, in sort of a botched investigation where the police went to her apartment thinking that maybe there were drugs stashed there as part of some drug investigation that they were looking into. And they busted in plain clothes, unannounced. Her boyfriend, who had a gun, fired at the police thinking they were intruders. And they just lit up the apartment and ended up killing her in her sleep.
They were investigating because they suspected her boyfriend of being someone else. And so they executed a raid without announcing themselves. They just bust in through the door with guns drawn.
Because they had a no-knock warrant, which means you're allowed to enter the premises without knocking. And even in that case, so those officers haven't been charged yet, but I think the mayor of the city, or the police chief in that city, suspended basically the serving of those warrants. They said, hey, we're not going to do this anymore. So, even though those officers, I think, still need to be charged, at least, they're taking steps in that situation too. Now, part of the thing that's troubling is because of the age that we live in, with social media and with, everybody, of course, has a smartphone with a camera on it and all that kind of stuff. And it's like, if there weren't citizens around to record this kind of stuff, a lot of it would still, they'd still be getting away with, or it would be getting swept under the rug, or not getting a lot of media attention. But that's also part of, what is sort of bringing this to the forefront and creating this accountability, is like everybody can see it. And it's not like, oh, a witness said this, but the official police report said this. It's like, no, there's millions of witnesses all around the world that are watching this happen on video. So, like I said, this.
sorry, you see it with the video of the 74-year-old man at a protest
Mm-hmm.
the other day, who was very visibly pushed backwards by two police officers and falls. He does stumble afterwards and then fall backwards, and he cracks the back of his head open, and you can
Mm-hmm.
literally in the video, I mean, like, I don't want to get too graphic about it, but the reality of the situation is that the back of his head just starts bleeding, like not a little bit of blood, like it's rapid and it's a lot. And and then within the day, they, like, their statement was like, oh yeah, it was really unfortunate how that old dude tripped.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah,
it's
they
like,
said he slipped. They said there was like an altercation, whatever.
yeah,
The guy slipped and fell. It was an accident. And like 2 hours later, the video's circulating, and everybody's like, no, we can see clear as day. That's not what happened."
yeah, like it's like they're, even in the midst of everything, they're still trying to use their old tactics, of just, yeah, just kind of, sweep it under the rug, just, we're just going to use PR speak and that sort of thing, and just falsify stuff if we need to, because, like, it's more important that we have police out there than deal with the crimes that they're committing. Like, that's essentially the attitude. And you can tell that that's the attitude, because as these protests have ramped up and gotten bigger and bigger and bigger, and the police are coming out to meet them in force, in bigger and bigger and bigger forces, they're like, they are escalating the situations. They are, in some instances, instigating it. Obviously, like, we don't have evidence of every single sort of moment that this brutality and stuff like that has occurred, but I would say for a lot of them, there are people recording video, and you can see that it's a peaceful protest until the cops decide that they're going to push forward or toss in a tear gas or a flashbang, also rubber bullets, whatever, and escalating the situations. Like, people keep saying, like, oh, they need to be better at de-escalating. They need to be better at de-escalating. There is no de-escalating of a peaceful protest, right?
Yeah.
Like, people are standing, they are chanting things, and yeah, they're pissed off. They're
Mm-hmm.
aggressive, and they are obviously not cool with the police being there at all, right? Um, but a bunch of people standing yelling hurtful things, let's say, like, because that's really, at the end of the day, all it is. They're just yelling hurtful things, just bad words. They're saying bad words at police officers, um just to like play the reality of like what the protesters are doing. And then the police are taking that personally. They are foregoing their oaths and basically attacking the protesters. And then what you see in response from that escalation is riots, and then with riots come opportunistic looters, right? And it's sort of, there's the three aspects of that. There's the protesters, there's the rioters, and there's looters, right? And
Mm-hmm.
protesters are there to protest, and if you allow them to peacefully protest, that's what's going to happen. And I would say all of the instances that I've been paying attention to, that's exactly how it's gone down, right? The second that it gets, like, that there's the push, whether it's an instigator coming in trying to start something, by throwing something at the police, or breaking a window or something like that, or or it's the police instigating. Once the riot starts, there are people who are pissed off, and I think justifiably so, or B, people who are there waiting for that opportunity, right? How many videos of
Mm-hmm.
like, let's say 16 to 25-year-old white men with skateboards have we seen smashing windows over the last 2 weeks? A lot.
Quite a few.
A lot. Um, and I've said, like, Crystal and I were talking about this the other day. We were in downtown Vancouver for the Stanley Cup final when we lost, and 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 you could feel it. Like, you could tell that most people were there for the hockey game, because they had like a big screen outside, and most people were there for the hockey game. But you could tell there were these people sort of on the fringes that they had no interest in the hockey. They were specifically there because in 1994 we rioted when we were in the Stanley Cup final, and so they thought, here, it's going to happen again. And there, at one point, I can remember towards the end of the game, we saw these guys climbing essentially the street light up until one of them managed to get up on top of the street light and was like hanging from like the traffic light, right? Like the stop, like
Yeah.
a stop, like the 3 light traffic light.
Mm-hmm.
And it was at that point that we turned to each other and we were like, we gotta get out of here. Because you could tell that, like, these people, like, the second that this game was over, win or lose, this is gonna be a riot, right? And so
Yeah.
those are the people that I'm talking about. Those people have nothing to do with the protest, just like they had nothing to do with the hockey game, right?
Mm-hmm. No, just like yeah, and I mean, we see that all the time here. Like, for instance, Jake Paul, who's sort of an infamous YouTuber, was caught right here where I live in Arizona. So there have been mostly peaceful protests in downtown Phoenix, and then over in Scottsdale, which is kind of like the more upper class, not really suburb, but part of the Phoenix metropolitan area. It's one of the cities that makes up sort of this area. And Scottsdale's where all like the rich athletes and stuff live, and there's like the Scottsdale Fashion Square Mall. And Jake Paul got caught looting over there,
Yeah.
like, and but there was looting going on there where it was clearly like just people looking to sort of take advantage of the sort of the anarchy and the chaos, and maybe pretend to join the movement and go, oh yeah, screw the establishment, I'm gonna bust in here and steal a $200 pair of shoes, like not for my own interest, just because I support the cause, of course, like get out of here. And so it's like, yeah, it's frustrating seeing so many people obviously try to take advantage of that situation. And like you said, sometimes it's police instigators, or even just like white supremacists or people who disagree with the Black Lives Matter movement that are trying to sort of delegitimize it, or cause chaos just to make other people look bad or whatever. Other times it's people just, like you said, trying to take advantage of it for their own self-interest, or just trying to sort of get caught up in the wave and, not do anything progressive for the movement. But like I said, I really feel like there's a group of people that are just sort of anti-government in general, or anti-establishment, and they're just like, oh, I don't know what you guys are here for, but we're marching against the government and we're throwing and breaking stuff, and like, oh yeah, sure, I'll join in on that. And that obviously is not helpful or productive to anything. So
well, and not I don't want to derail too much, but I just have to bring it up. I think it's dangerous to not talk about or to neglect the idea that white supremacists in North America are taking advantage of this situation to try and ignite a larger conflict, right?
Oh, absolutely.
And for anybody who pays attention to this stuff, which as a Jewish man I kind of have to, obviously over the last few years, as Trump has emboldened them, these white supremacists, white nationalists, Nazis have been just crawling out of the woodwork, right? And if you've done any kind of research into it, or even just watched a movie or two on the subject, you can know that the FBI's been infiltrating these groups for years. I still haven't watched Black Klansman.
Oh, I haven't either. I want to, though.
I really need to. But I think that's more police than FBI. But there's a movie called Imperium, starring Daniel Radcliffe, that is it's a dramatization, but it's based on a real world account of an FBI agent who basically gets himself into a white supremacist group in order to for them to get basically intelligence, right? And in their playbook is one of their goals is to ignite a race war, right? With the intention of basically turning the American people, the white American people, against minorities, against other ethnicities, right? And we've seen so many videos of these white guys starting stuff in the midst of these protests, and then you see a bunch of people, but predominantly black people, coming out and like basically shutting them down, right? Stopping them from whatever they're doing and telling them to get the hell out of there. And I firmly believe that the vast majority of these people are they're part of these white nationalist groups. The other part of it that's really scary is that in those same playbooks, infiltrating the like all levels of law enforcement and the military is also in there, right?
Oh, I saw a video the other day, and this was scary. It was a video that somebody took at a protest of a police officer talking to a group of guys who I think were part of some white supremacist group.
The Proud Boys, yeah.
The Proud Boys, yeah. And he was basically warning them, like, hey, just so you know, we're going to be out here arresting people as soon as curfew starts. Like, why don't you guys go hide inside that building and stay out of sight so that it doesn't look suspicious and doesn't look like we're playing favorites when we arrest, like, the black people and not you, essentially.
Yeah.
And it was like, that was troubling to see, you know, and gosh, I mean, it's so frustrating, all the different sort of like I feel like we start with one issue here and it splits out into like 1,000 different things.
Yeah.
And it's, you know, it's like, now we got to tackle this too. I mean, you know, this is part of like, this is almost a separate issue that we need to weed out.
I mean, it isn't one issue, right? There are symptoms all over the place, but if you don't treat the disease, you know, treating the symptoms is only gonna, and as we've seen, I think, and the reason why these protests are happening again, as they did in Ferguson, right? Is that we treat the symptoms, or in that instance, is like, you don't even treat the symptom, you just kind of put a balm on it and hope that it goes away, right? Which for any of us who have ever had an ailment and done that, you just go like, oh, I'm just gonna rub some ointment on this and, you know, hope I don't have to go to the doctor. By the time that you end up going to the doctor, you're embarrassed because you're like, I probably should have come in 2 weeks ago, right? Like, because it never works. And that's kind of
what I was talking about, where these things keep happening and it keeps, you know, it gets attention, people march, you know, maybe there's a little bit something done about it, but then it kind of just dies down, or it gets swept under the rug, or the officers don't get charged or whatever. But I think, you know, kind of going back to something you were talking about earlier when we were talking about accountability and how a lot of times that's where the outrage is. But I think that's another reason why this time it feels different, is because there's so much sort of built up under the surface. It's not just about an officer being held accountable for killing a black man. It's about the injustices and the systematic racism that black people face on a daily basis. Because like I said, in this case, the officers were all fired immediately. They're all charged. You know, maybe not right off the bat, but within, you know, 2 weeks, and who knows how long it'll take for a trial and a verdict to come, because the justice system takes forever. But, you know, it feels like in this case, it's like people want more, and I feel like they should. And it's not, we don't just want them to be held accountable in this one instance. We want this to stop happening, but we also want, you know, I mean, it's permeated throughout the culture. I mean, for example, the other, you know, it's funny how like so many other videos and other examples of this pop up just in the wake of this, where like a couple days after the George Floyd killing, there was the guy, and I forget his name, he was, you know, the black man who was bird watching in Central Park in New York City, and a white woman, you know, called the police on him because there's a rule that you have to have your dog on a leash, and her dog was off the leash, and he said, "Hey, ma'am, you need to have your dog on the leash," and she freaks out and is like, "He's threatening me and harassing me, and this black man is filming me and wants," clearly felt threatened by him just because he was black, and like freaked out on him, and people were like, "Yeah, we face that too," and so it's just, I feel like, like you said, it's like it's a flashpoint, but not just of it's not just anymore about killings or just white police officers killing unarmed black men, but it's about just systematic racism and cultural racism too. I mean, you kind of touched on that too. Like, it's almost two separate issues. Like, there's systematic racism, which is all the systems in place that have been there for hundreds of years to benefit white people and hold people of color down, that have been there since the days of slavery. And it's like, well, it's like, okay, well, now we're not, those laws aren't still around or anything, but it's like, okay, yeah, but obviously the effects of those are still being felt today. Whether it's Jim Crow laws, or like redlining, which was, laws where they would basically zone out the poor sections of a city and say, okay, the black people can only live here, and that's not in practice anymore, but that's why you have low income black communities still today. So that's the systematics.
It's when they remove the laws. The guy that we were talking about is Christian Cooper. He was the black guy who was just bird watching in Central Park, and then told this white woman to get her dog back on its leash, and she threatened to call the cops on him, which is a threat of, if you don't leave me alone, I'm going to call the police here. They're probably going to shoot you. Right? Like, so she was absolutely weaponizing her whiteness and the police against him, which is awful. But like, those, we were talking about with the redlining and stuff like that, it's like we remove the law, but then if nothing is done to correct the injustice, right? It's like what you're saying about these officers. Sure, yeah, they're charged. Hopefully they end up going to jail, right? That's what we want to see happen. But if that's all that happens, then 6 months later we're just going to be right back here. It's going to happen again. Right?
Exactly. And that's why I say this is a good first step, but now we need to make that, I wouldn't even say make that commonplace, because you don't want this to keep happening and we're going to charge the officers every time. No, you want to put systems in place where that's being prevented from happening.
Yeah. I think when you look at it, we could talk about solutions, right? There's a lot of solutioning that can be done of like, well, first off, police in North America, it's Canada as well, need more training.
Absolutely. Yeah, I
think we do a little bit better job here than you guys do, because there it's like, I think what I saw was like, it's like 20 months or something like that. Like, it's not, it's
no, it's well, from what I saw, this was just one graphic that I saw just on Twitter the other day, and it was comparing different countries. And it had, and I don't remember what the countries were, but a lot of them were like smaller European countries, and I know that like population size and demographic and stuff has a lot to do with it as well.
I've got it.
But
yeah,
so there are countries where where it was showing like countries that had like 2 to 3 years of training required for police.
Yeah, it's like Norway, Finland, and Iceland. It's like 3 years, 2 years, 2 years, and then
and their number of civilians killed by police in the last like 10 to 20 years is in the single digits.
Yeah,
and then in America, it's 21 weeks of training required, and there's like 8,000 killings since the year 2000. So obviously, like, that's a really key solution, right? But how does that solution happen? And I think something happened today at one of the protests. Mitt Romney showed up, right? And Mitt Romney posted on his Twitter, Black Lives Matter. Now, like, no Republican politician has said those words in a non-derisive way, right? Yeah.
Trump has so far exceeded his mandate as the president of the United States. He has so flagrantly abused his power, and he has just unjustifiably attacked his own citizens in broad daylight, right? Like not even like there's not even anything sneaky about it. He's proud of himself for this, and it's at the point where you've got Mitt Romney, who, like, if everybody remembers back to the race between Mitt Romney and Obama, now Romney was never going to win, but like it got dirty, right? And that's where the whole birther thing started, and like it's we're not talking about a nice guy. Like, I'm not giving props to Mitt Romney here. Let's be really clear about that. He's still a terrible person. But he's out there walking in these protests and posting on his Twitter Black Lives Matter. And whether it's political theatrics or not, I don't really care. It's a change in what we've seen before, right? And you've got like Colin Powell stepping out and going like, this is ridiculous, this is unacceptable. Like, again, not a good dude, war criminal as far as most people are concerned, right? In terms of like the war in Iraq and Afghanistan and that sort of thing, right? Like these are guys who have made some very, very bad decisions in the past, who I think are being forced to look at the state of American politics and really where they've left it, because they're the ones who opened the door for a guy like Trump to come in and do this stuff, and they're regretful, right? And I think that the key is obviously on the Democratic side. It's going to be an easier fight, but even still, we have to hold liberal politicians accountable for the things that they're going to say on the campaign trail in the next year, right? But there's an opportunity right now to actually get some of these Republican politicians on the right side of history, because it's a bad look, and they know it's a bad look, and they know that some of them are up for re-election. And what's his face just got booted out. Steve King just got booted out. And they're kind of seeing the writing on the wall, but like that doesn't mean ease up. It means, like I said before, like hit the accelerator. Like, this is the time when you put more pressure on them, not less, right? Biden's saying a lot of the right stuff right now, and I happen to think that Biden is a good person, if not a flawed politician, right? But now's the time to start holding him accountable to the things that he's been saying, right? Obviously, he is the better alternative. And I think that's one of the things that's really difficult, and I think it's what happened in 2016, is that the emails, Benghazi, whatever, all that stuff with Hillary, it polluted the real conversation, which was like, you know, sort of the sanctity of democracy, and the actual sort of like sacredness of trust that we put in politicians, right? Trump came out saying everything everybody wanted to hear, but obviously he was full of it, and people bought that hook, line, and sinker, and they also bought into the media narrative around Hillary Clinton, which was an easier sell because she was a woman, and people were already predisposed to dismiss her, but that can't happen this time around. I think people need to be a little bit more unified and a little bit more strategic in the way that they're going to vote. It really doesn't matter if Joe Biden has done some bad stuff in his past. He definitely has. I think that everybody can agree on that. And I'm not saying that it doesn't matter, and he shouldn't be held accountable for that stuff too, but in terms of leadership and accountability, like, who are you? You can't hold Trump accountable. He is impeached. He was impeached. He's an impeached president, and yet he's still going to run for re-election. The Republicans are still backing him as of right now. Right? As
of right now. Yeah. We'll see if that changes.
Hopefully this changes in the air, right? And that it catches like wildfire.
I mean, it probably won't, but I mean, just in the past couple of days with the number that have turned against him.
But I think it's really important for everybody to unite I don't care who the other guy is on the ballot. And voting independent isn't a solution. Just flat out. If you vote independent, you're a coward. Your convictions are just as bad as anybody who votes for Trump. That's my opinion, and people can take me to the mat for that if they want. But I don't care. Like that. You guys have a 2-party system down there, and your government's not very representative. What with the gerrymandering and the way that you're what's it called? I'm losing it right now. It's late when we're recording. But the way that like one state has less people but more is more important in terms of the overall result, right?
Yeah, the electoral college, that kind of stuff. Yeah.
The system is set up like a lot of these systems that we're talking about on this episode. They are set up to keep the people exactly where the powerful want them, right? And the reason why these electoral colleges are set up the way that they are, the district lines are set up the way that they are, is in order for these politicians to maintain their power structures. You're never going to beat them without playing by their rules. And I think that that's one of the things that people need to start realizing. A couple of years ago, in Canada, we wanted to get rid of our conservative politicians. The way that we did it is that a guy set up a website that was like, hey, you're strategically where you are, it's more likely to go this way than that way in terms of, and we have multiple parties here, so it's a slightly different situation, but it still applies. It's like, okay, similar idea to like swing states, right? It's like, look, yeah, you want to vote liberal, but if you vote for the NDP, you'll ensure that the conservatives won't get a seat, right? The conservatives are our version of the Republicans, obviously. So it was like strategic voting became a part of our culture in that election. The idea was that Trudeau was saying that he was going to do away with first past the post, which is the way that we basically count the votes and who gets in and whatnot. He didn't do it. He's totally like reneged on that, and it's that's a whole Canadian politics thing. But so that's the accountability thing, right? Is that politicians are going to make promises, they're going to say stuff, and then it's our job as citizens to hold them to the promises that they make. But the point being, it's like sometimes you have to go against your party in order to make sure that the right thing is done, right? In order to see justice done. And that's kind of where we're at right now. The other important part is federal politics are flashy. That's what everybody talks about. But if you want real change on the levels of what we're talking about when it comes to a police reform or abolishment, abolition, I think it's abolition. But if you really want to see that stuff happen, it actually happens on your local and state or provincial level. Like your municipal government has way more power to enact immediate change than state or federal. Federal actually is like the least efficient because it's got to go through so many channels and everybody has to agree and nobody's going to, right? Mm-hmm. It's going to take forever for it to even become an issue. And then when it does, it's just going to be debated and then it's just going to get thrown out basically. If you want to see real stuff happen, real change happen, it's going to happen on the municipal level. And that's one of the things that Obama was talking about the other day. It's like, that's where you have to get involved. And it's tough. It's boring stuff. City council meetings. The only thing more boring than a city council meeting is a church council meeting or a parent association, like a school PAC, right? Like
PTO.
Yeah. Like those are the only things more boring than city council. Because at least at city council, every once in a while, you get an eccentric person come in and say, I'm really mad because all the fire hydrants aren't purple, You're like, okay, this is not an issue that anybody else agrees with, but go ahead, say your piece. So yeah, I don't know. I think that there's a real need for people to not be complacent and not remain neutral in some of these fights, and to really stand up for. I don't like it's the party thing that gets me. Who cares about the party? It's about what's right, and the word for that is justice, but that's loaded at this point. What we're talking about is moral right and wrong, and I should hope that everybody's watching these videos of these protests and that they're seeing there's a lot morally wrong with the police as an institution, and something has to happen. Like, full stop.
Yeah.
That's kind of the end of it. Something has to happen, and that could be reform. It could be abolition and a new community safety plan put in place, which is what Minneapolis is talking about right now.
Yeah, and that's going to be an interesting experiment if they actually go through with it. Because I don't know. I'm just like, because they talked about doing like a community-led safety program, and I'm like, and as much as there are issues in the police department and things that need to be changed and things that probably need to just get completely chucked out, like, are we going to have a community SWAT team? Like, if you've got, some armed drug dealers, like, you're going to send Steve from down the street to go deal with those guys? I don't know, man. So
no, here's the thing that I think is the solution to something like that. I do think that obviously, because the go-to that I went to was the school shooting issue, right? And here's the problem. It's never going to work for you guys fully until you deal with the Second Amendment. Until you guys have tighter gun laws, it's just never going to be an easy solution. I don't want to say that it can't be solved, but it's definitely the fact that people have such easy access to automatic weapons in the United States. It's something that in Canada we look at and we just don't understand, like, how that's a thing.
I can imagine, and yet every time that issue comes up, there are people here that are like, "I'm going to shoot you if you come after my guns." So it just kind of comes to a standstill, and nothing gets done about it.
I mean, we see the picture of the guy from the protests a few weeks ago. The all the right wing nut jobs coming out of the woodwork saying that they want to get haircuts. And you see the picture of a guy in a subway with a goddamn rocket launcher on his head. Like,
I swear, I just saw that picture for the first time the other day, and I showed it to my wife, and I was like, keep in mind this might be photoshopped, because don't believe everything you see on the internet.
Sure.
But some dude brought a freaking rocket launcher into a subway.
Yeah. And like, as long as that's a reality in the US, I don't know what a community safety plan looks like. It's hard for me to imagine what that looks like. Yeah. Now, I'm not a politician. I'm a graphic designer and branding expert. So like, when you guys figure out what that is and then you need somebody to put a nice logo to it, let me know. And that's where I can actually be of use and of service. But like, I have questions about that. I have questions about, people have access to firearms. So it feels to me like an armed response is something that is somewhat necessary. My thought on that is that needs to be something that's on a higher level, that has a higher accountability. And so we're talking about, like,
you're saying
a federal level, right? Like, that's
right. Like, just because, like, you have FBI armed citizens, you can't have them policing other citizens, because then who gets to decide who's in the right when who shoots who, like,
But that said, it's like there are people who are experts in this stuff. There is there are existing examples of these systems working. So I think that it's we've talked about it. There are so many aspects to this. There are so many facets. There's so many issues that all contribute to it. It's not one thing. I think that a lot of the stuff that Joe Biden has said in the last couple of weeks, even before this started, there's that interview that he got in a lot of hot water for. What his closing remarks of like, well, if you're voting for Trump, then in his words, you ain't black. A poor choice of words, but I think that the sentiment maybe I was lost in that because the whatever it is 60 minutes of that interview before that talking about real issues, he had a lot of very important, very salient things to say about the systems of oppression in the United States that black people specifically, but also Latinos and Hispanic people suffer from as well. Issues of education, access, and the community services in poor neighborhoods and stuff like that. Right? It's all part of the same thing. I think when you start dealing with some of the systemic issues, you'll notice that some of these other problems will start to lessen, right? And people, one of the best things that I saw in the last couple of days on the subject of defunding the police is people have a really hard time imagining what that looks like, yet we've been defunding education for decades.
Yep, I saw that too.
Right? And that is like it's right there. You want to know why things are getting seem to be I don't know, but they seem to be getting worse and not better. That's it right there. I saw a tweet from Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez today that the budget for the NYPD is $6 billion. Billion with a B. $6 billion. Yet New York City has problems with homelessness, drug addiction, access to education, all of these things. It's when you put the budget of all of those other infrastructure and social programs together, it doesn't even come close to $6 billion.
Well,
what
yeah, I
are
mean,
they
just
spending $6 billion on? And you see it on the streets right now because they've got tanks and tear gas and riot gear. They look like the military. It's ridiculous.
Even more to that point, I mean, I've seen a lot of people point out how like we're in the middle of this pandemic, and I don't know how you guys have been dealing with it up there in Canada, but I mean, here obviously like nobody knows where to go to get tested. I mean, like we do now, but it took, weeks to get to that point. There's still a shortage of protective equipment and just sort of a lack of general direction. It still feels like, but specific issue like lack of access to protective equipment and ventilators and respirators and the kind of things that you need to tackle this pandemic. And they're like, how long have we been waiting for this stuff? And yet look how quickly they've sprung up with riot gear and tear gas and tanks and stuff to deal with these protesters, or even like Trump ordered them to build a fence around the White House because protests were starting to happen there and stuff. And I told my wife, I was like, why that is? Because Trump's not afraid of coronavirus. He's afraid of us.
Yep.
So yeah, I mean, it's like you said, just that allocate. Go ahead.
Sorry, you and I, we're not big fans of the Rise of Skywalker, right?
No.
But that moment towards the end of the movie, it just seems to kind of echo over and over lately.
Yeah. There are more of us, Poe. Right? There are more of us.
Yeah. So, yeah, I made a tweet. I made a joke the other day of like, does Mexico want to chip in to replace that fence with a 16-foot wall with barbed wire? Canada will put the tech on it so that he can't tweet anymore, so that he doesn't have access
Oh,
to the
please
internet.
do. Please do.
It's insane, right? Like, and I think you can kind of hear it in my voice that like I'm at the end of my rope with it, of like I don't know what else to do or contribute at this point. And I've probably talked way too much tonight, but hopefully the fact that it comes along with a contribution, that we're making that donation, giving money to people who do actually know what to do. I think that's kind of the biggest takeaway from all of this is there's a lot of I've been doing a lot of listening. I've been doing a lot of sitting back and trying to take it in.
And like I said, I've been trying to do a lot of listening as well as expressing my own opinions and my own frustrations, and obviously as a black man it's hard when you continuously see this happen to black people, but even as someone that like I said, doesn't have, the typical experience of Black America, like just learning perspectives from other Black people and what they've gone through, and situations where they've experienced racism or oppression that I haven't experienced, has just been kind of eye opening. And again, it's like, again, I'm thankful and blessed that I've had the life that I've had where I haven't had to experience a lot of that stuff, but it also can be a little bit frustrating, like trying to identify with your own people almost, but it's just I don't know, like I said, it's really encouraging to see what's going on right now. It's hard and it's tough knowing the injustices that are going on, but seeing so many people all around the world speak out about it is really encouraging. And like you said, we just got to keep that momentum going, and just keep it going until change is made, until we see something. And I don't know what that's going to look like. I mean, we started talking about that a little bit earlier. Like, it starts with holding people accountable for these actions, but then it continues with sort of dismantling some of these systematic racist systems that have been in place for hundreds of years, where there may not still be laws prohibiting Black people from doing certain things, but the effects of that are still being felt in communities, and just systems throughout the police system, and the stuff that they can get away with and whatever, like starting to turn some of that around is going to be key to just pushing this forward. But it's also, again, it's tough to see, but also good for change that this has been bringing up so many other issues of outside of just police and just people being killed, but stuff that people go through on a daily basis. And even I was starting to get to this earlier, talking about the guy that was out bird watching and the lady flips out and calls the cops on him. Like, that's not systematic racism or systemic racism. Like, that's just an average person being a racist. And that's almost a whole separate issue. Like, you can change laws and programs and things to fix the laws and the systems that have racism built into them, but it's also a heart issue. We're just, and some people are willfully racist and just want to be that way because they're bad people. And then there are other people who, maybe don't think of it as like, oh, I'm not racist because I don't say the N-word or I don't hate Black people or whatever, but maybe think about ways, like certain preconceived notions, not just about Black people, but, anybody in general, maybe ways that, there's just a certain thing that you're used to saying or used to doing. I used the example, I was talking about this the other day. I was like, if you're walking down the street late at night and you see a Black guy walking towards you, and your first instinct is to cross the street, like, stop and think, why is that? If it's because he's got his hands in his pocket and you're worried that maybe he's got a gun or something that you can't see and you don't feel safe, then sure. But if you don't feel safe just because he's a Black man, then maybe you need to stop and check yourself. So, so I think it's going to take that too, people sort of evaluating that kind of stuff and having open discussions about it, because there's a lot of stuff, especially, cultural experiences of other people that you maybe come from a different background that you're not aware of. And you maybe realize like, oh, this doesn't mean anything to me, but it means something different to this person. Like, just asking questions and getting to know more of each other's experiences, I think, is also something that really is just going to, help everybody kind of get through this together and move us to a place where all lives do matter equally, and we don't have to highlight Black Lives Matter. I mean, that's another thing that I'm sure we don't necessarily really need to touch on this, but I'll go off on this a little bit. When people say Black Lives Matter and people say, oh well, all lives matter, it's like, yeah, that's the point. That's the point that we want to get to. It's not like we're highlighting, only Black Lives Matter or Black Lives Matter more. It's like everybody should matter equally, but we're at a point where Black people are being treated by police or by certain people or whatever like our lives don't matter. And so it's like Black Lives Matter too, and we're trying to get up to that even play. And obviously it's not just Black people. Like there's all kinds of marginalized groups that need help and need to sort of be brought up to that level playing field. But yeah, I mean, so I hope one day we can all say all lives matter and it's true, and there's nobody being left out or nobody that's still being oppressed. But until that point, we got work to do.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's an important lesson for everybody to take away, right? It's what you're talking about before about the implicit racism, which is the racism that it's not overt, it's not saying the N-word or actively playing into systems of oppression and stuff like that. It is the prejudice that I think that we all, the prejudice that we all deal with. Let me use clear, concise language with this. And they everybody, but in particular, specifically, white people need to own up to, right? It's the difference between racism and a racist, right? Which I think is what you were talking about. A racist is a person who is more than likely proud of their racism, right? But racism is a thing that we all have to deal with on a daily basis, no matter who you are, where you are, what you do. It doesn't matter. We're all either benefiting from systems of racism or we're being oppressed by them. So, like, there are a lot of white people who want to say like, oh well, but I'm not, like I don't have it so good or whatever, and we don't need to explain what privilege is necessarily, but like the basic idea of like, yeah, well, sure, your life is difficult and everything that you've had to work for, but like where you are isn't because of the color of your skin, right? That's white privilege.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
And I think I think we are getting to a critical mass, a tipping point where enough people are beginning to understand these concepts that real change can start to happen. And it is a critical mass. It is that thing of like the spark becoming a flame so that it can catch fire, right? Because that's how it has to start. But in order for it to really like engulf and take over, it does have to reach that critical mass where it can't be stopped. It can't be put out, right? And that's what you need to see happen. It feels like maybe this is that time, and I really 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 hope that this is that time. We're gonna. I think we'll know pretty quick whether or not it is, because if this just ends up becoming another talking point on the campaign, on the campaign trail, and gets politicized and turned into an us versus them issue, then we'll know that there's still more work to do, right? But when I see the pictures of the protests from yesterday and today, and the thousands upon thousands of people pouring into the streets in the midst of a global pandemic, and hopefully everybody's staying safe and wearing their masks and all that, but with the very real threat to your life of being out there, not only from the pandemic but also from this police brutality that we're seeing over and over. And people are going out and saying like enough is enough. I hope that this is the change. I hope this is very similar to the Me Too movement from a couple of years ago, where it's like that seemed to finally hit a critical mass within Hollywood, at least, of like, you know, the systems are going to start changing. I think there's still a lot of work to go there as well, but
Yeah, and I mean, same case here. Like, you're right. I think in that case with the Me Too movement, we've got a long way to go. But you saw some real change and kind of a shift happen, and I'm hoping that's what happens here as well. Because we're not going to fix all these systems overnight. We're not going to solve racism overnight. And like you said, racism in general is probably never going to go away.
Yeah.
You know, we can get to a point where all the laws are completely fair and equal, and you know, there's equal economic opportunity for black people, and you know, opportunities within the justice system, and all that kind of stuff. And there's still going to be some people out there that are white or any other race and don't like people of another race just because of the color of their skin, and that's a sad fact. But you know, it's just one of the crappy things about the world that just kind of is the way it is. But to just have something big happen now and have that be something that sort of sets us off on the path where it's like, okay, we're starting to get the ball rolling, and we're just going to keep progressing and keep making changes so that you know, so that again, this, you know, George Floyd probably not going to be the last black man ever killed by a white police officer, but we're hoping that it happens less and less frequently. That, you know, there's more and more accountability, more and more visibility, less and less systems in place that allow for this to happen or protect the people involved and all that sort of thing. And we'll just, you know, eventually get to a point where it's going to turn around. Now, I mean, again, I would love it if tomorrow everything was fixed with the snap of a finger, but obviously that's not realistic. But like you said, this just feels like a kind of a critical mass moment. And to me, really, again, the key indicator of that is the fact that this has gone worldwide, because I don't remember any of the other protests from like Ferguson or any of those other incidents. I don't remember seeing any other protests from across the globe. Now, there could have been some, and maybe I'm just misremembering, but especially on the global scale that this is happening right now. Like I saw like just a slideshow gallery the other day of like probably 30 plus countries where not just there were a few people marching, like they were flooding the streets of major cities. And I know especially like in England, this is a huge thing right now too. And obviously, you know, you and I both podcast about Star Wars for a hobby, and, you know, seeing John Boyega over there literally leading the resistance was pretty dang cool. But even, you know, then just today I saw videos of them, like they pulled down a statue of some old slave trader guy from the 1700s and like rolled it into the harbor where he used to dock his slave ships. And so it's not even, again, it's grown so much bigger than just one murder or just police brutality or just the plight of black people in America. It's all, people all over the world are standing up and saying enough of this racism crap.
I do think it's on a scale that we haven't seen before. And hopefully that's an indicator of effect. And I think it's a generational thing. And I think in the couple of years since Ferguson, it's that many more people are now old enough to get out on the street and say something about it, right? So hopefully that's the case, and hopefully what we're seeing is a real turn in the conversation towards real change. We've been talking for a while. Like we said at the beginning of this, we're not going to solve any problems. But I do hope that some of the people listening to this podcast have heard some ideas that maybe they hadn't heard yet, or some new ways of presenting it, or in the least that we've given you some more language to go out into the world and talk to other people about this. I think one of the most important things that I can say from my perspective as a white guy in this whole sort of with the dynamics of how everything works is I think it's really easy for white people to be afraid that they're not welcome in the conversation. We are welcome in the conversation, and I think that black people and other minorities want us to be a part of the conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean,
and it doesn't
I
change
think,
without us, so we have to show up. But
yes.
you have to show up with an open heart and an open mind, ready to take some real serious feedback and criticism, not get offended by it, hear it for what it is, and if you do really want to see change, it's like it has to start with you. That's the most important part of it. So just, like, don't shy away from it. Don't stay away from the conversations. It's going to be uncomfortable. It's going to suck. It's going to be exhausting, but your discomfort is nothing. Your temporary discomfort, I'll actually qualify that, is nothing compared to the permanent discomfort that black people and people of color have to deal with every day in North America, not just the United States, but also in Canada. And let's not leave Indigenous people out of this conversation either, because in Canada, that's a huge problem. That's really sort of our shameful secret up here. That doesn't get talked about a lot. So, like we benefit from the systems. We create the systems in a lot of instances and enforce them, and that's not going to change without our participation. So to all of the white people listening, and here's one of the things that I've actually learned over the course of the last couple of days, as I've been tweeting things and seeing the interactions on Twitter from the people that follow me and the podcast and whatnot. Our audience is actually a lot more diverse than I ever thought that it was, and that's my failing. I never thought about it. Just didn't think about it, right? The majority of our Patreon supporters, I think, are white, but that doesn't mean that our whole audience is represented there. So it's like we're talking to a diverse group of people. There's a lot of people listening to this podcast, coming at it from a lot of different perspectives. I want this to be not the end of our conversation, but this is the beginning of the conversation within the Thunderquack community. And so I want to open that up, and I want, like, if this conversation isn't going to go away, it's not going to stop. Amanda and I were talking about that today over text. This is going to be something that's going to be ongoing, especially because it is an election year, and this is going to be one of the main talking points, I think, going into it. So if you've got something that you want to say, whether it's just an opinion or a correction for us, for Thunderquack as an organization or as a podcast or whatever, don't be afraid. Please get in contact with us through the different channels. I don't want to sound like I'm promoting things, but you guys know we're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, all that stuff. I don't care how you do it, like what method, whatever's the most comfortable for you, whatever the best place to talk to us is. If there's something that we could be doing more of, if there's something that we should be doing less of, like, for instance, me talking, maybe a little bit less, but we want to be open to that feedback, specifically to criticism, so that we can grow and be better, because I have always wanted Thunderquack to be an inclusive community. I think at times maybe we haven't lived up to that as well as we could have. And so it's a learning experience, and it's not like shutting things down isn't going to move things forward. Everybody has to be open and willing to move forward together in order for us to see change as a community, right? And that change as a community hopefully can also change those systems. So that's all. That's everything that I'm gonna say for this episode. Kyle, I'll let you close it out with anything that you want to say, and then we'll sign off.
Yeah, no, I mean, really, all I had as far as closing thoughts, I mean, you kind of just hit the nail on the head as far as, I would invite everybody to just get in discussions, not just with us, but with, your friends, your family members, people that you interact with on a daily basis. And if you're white or, a different race thinking or talking about these black issues, don't be afraid to speak up, and don't, sort of try to take control of the conversation from black people, or like tell them what to feel or what to think, or just, don't be presumptive, but be open and, try to, sort of learn from other people's perspectives, but also, yeah, don't be afraid to speak up and think, oh, I can't say Black Lives Matter, or I can't, speak out in defense of, black people or black rights or whatever, because, that doesn't apply to me. Because we need all the help we can get. Look, we've been fighting this fight for hundreds of years. And, like you said, talking about that ending of Rise of Skywalker, when Lando shows up with all the reinforcements at the end, it's, we need the whole resistance together behind us. So, yeah, definitely. Like, because I've heard that from people too. Like, I had a friend who wanted to organize sort of a small protest, and she had some friends who were white that told her, like, oh no, you shouldn't do that, you should just go join a black led movement, because otherwise you're taking away voices from black people. And she's an Asian woman, and I told her, I was like, no, go ahead, do your thing. Like, if I was a black man and I saw a whole group of like white and Asian people protesting on behalf of Black Lives Matter, and, again, not trying to like sort of take control of it or assume that they know, everything that we're going through or whatever, but just being allies and saying, hey, we're not in this group, but we see that what's being done to this group is wrong and we want to help change it. Like, that's awesome.
Yeah. I think again, the key to that is join wherever you can, but if there isn't anything to join, you are fully capable of organizing yourself no matter who you are.
Yeah, definitely. But, and then even, again, in just daily conversations too, or you see somebody being racist, like, you don't have to be a black person to speak up and say, hey, don't say that about black people. So, yeah, it's going to take all of us to, to help turn this thing around, to affect change. And like I said, I mean, obviously we're talking about specific black issues, right now too, but I mean, this is sort of, it really is a global issue and a multicultural issue, and there are other indigenous or other oppressed communities, and you mentioned indigenous people, but all kinds of other ethnicities and groups that that need help as well. And so I'm trying to be open and learn more about those as well, and look for areas where I can help lift those people up. And like I said, I mean, really, all lives matter is the goal. Like, we want to get to that point, but until then, we're talking about Black Lives Matter, and we got work to do to get everybody on that equal playing field. So, but yeah, just, if for anybody listening, I don't know who all specifically is listening to this, but, just for people that are supporting this, and whether you're just, spreading your messages of positivity in support of it, or whether you're actually going out and protesting or donating or whatever you're doing, or again, just talking to people about it and maybe having productive discussions, either about ways that you can change your own mindset, or trying to change somebody else's mindset that's close to you, and trying to help them kind of see ways that they can change. I mean, all of that is helpful and productive. And, if you're doing anything, never feel like it's not enough. And maybe if you can do more, then go ahead and do what you're able to do. But, don't look at like Michael Jordan donating $100 million and say, oh, well, I could only donate $5. Like, every little bit helps, and every bit of support is appreciated. So.
Awesome. Well, I guess that's it for this episode. Thank you for listening. I really appreciate it. Kyle, thank you for jumping on and being a part of this one.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. And like I said, this will be an ongoing conversation, right? This isn't the end. This is just the start of it for us. So
yeah. And hopefully the next time we talk about it, we can look back and go, wow, look how much progress we made.
Yeah, absolutely. Rather than promote our own such and such, which you can hear on literally any other episode of this podcast, I'm going to go ahead and take this moment to highlight a couple of places that I've been getting some of my information from recently. Some really great podcasts. One is Minority Corner, which I heard as a result of being subscribed to My Brother and Me, which is a McElroy brothers podcast. But they did a feed drop in their feed of Minority Corner. And I recommend going and listening to the latest episode of that podcast. Maybe it's not the latest episode anymore, but another one is the podcast Spawn on Me, which is a video game podcast, but they've got an episode from Tuesday titled "A Lesson in Blackness" that I really recommend. And just take this opportunity, I should say, to go out there and maybe diversify your listening a little bit. There's Thunderquack is a great example of the fact that there are a lot of white dudes between the age of 25 and 40 that want to talk about nerdy stuff. But there are other podcasts out there. So go out there. There are a lot of lists. But those are the two that I've listened to in the last week that have had really great conversation. And I've really learned a lot. So I think that's the number one thing that everybody can do right now. Donate, contribute, however you can. And it's about more than just money. But when you're done doing that, because that's a very quick action that you can take, signing petitions, donating, etc. The ongoing thing is to keep learning and listening, particularly to people of color, and like you said, Kyle, trying to learn from their experiences and hear what they have to say, to broaden your horizons and your understanding of things. So with that, thank you for listening to the Thunderquack podcast. Thank you for joining us this week. Amanda and I should be back next week, a regular time, sort of getting back to business as usual to a certain degree. But until then, thank you for listening. We will see you next time. Thank you, Kyle, for joining us.
Of course.